We begin today the Gemara on Daf Lamed Zayin Amud Beis, 4 lines from the bottom of the Amud, where it says Ulerave the Omar. So this is going on Rava's interpretation of the Mishnah here. The Mishnah speaks about an Eved Kanani that got captured, and then some Yid came and redeemed him. So the Tanakam in the Mishnah makes a distinction that if this person that redeems him for the purpose that he should be a slave, so he has to work as a slave. If he redeems him with the purpose that he should be ben chayren, that he should be free, so then he becomes free. So Rava's interpretation of the Mishnah is that when it says that he has to be a slave, he redeemed him to be a slave, he has to be a slave to work for who? Rava says the first master was miyayish already. He gave up, so he lost his ownership over this slave. The one that's freeing him, this Yid now that's coming and freeing him, he will acquire him to be his slave. That was Rava's pshat in the Mishnah. So on this, the Gemara asks, Rava here that said that the pshat in the Mishnah is that the first master gave up. When it says that he has to work, it means he has to work now for this Yid, this second master that's coming and redeeming him. Rabbi Sheni, but the question is, this second master now, Miman Kanile, from who is he acquiring the rights to work, to have this Eved that is work for him? He's redeeming him from someone that captured him. So the one that captured him, right now the Gemara understands, doesn't own him. He just went and captured him. The first master gave up on him already. So seemingly the moment you free him, he should go free. Who are you acquiring him from? So the Gemara answers, Mishaboy, you're actually acquiring him to become yours, to work for you from the captors. The captor actually does have an ownership over him. So the Gemara asks, is that really the case? Shaboy gufe mi kanile. Does the captor has an ownership over this slave that he captured just because he went and captured a goy? We're talking over here about a goyim that came and captured this Eved Kanani. They can, through this capturing him, could they acquire him to become theirs? And now, if another Yid comes and redeems this slave from them, he can acquire them from these captors. So the Gemara says, yes, the goyim, the shaboy, they have an ownership over him. Kanile lemaisi yadav. They do have an ownership for him regarding his work, the work that he does with his hands. So Rashi explains, when a Yid owns an Eved Kanani, you own the Eved Kanani not only for his work, but you own his whole body. You own him for everything. He becomes like a possession of yours. And not only that, he becomes a partial Yid because you own him. So there's a very strong kinyan. B'chlal, this entire sugya that's going to speak about the Eved Kanani, there are a few details here that's important to mention regarding the ownership, the extent of an ownership that a Yid has over an Eved Kanani. Number one, there's a monetary ownership, and that monetary ownership is a very, very strong level of ownership. It's not just the ownership of his value or of his work, but you actually own him, similar to the way a person can own an ox, a donkey. You own his very body, you own him completely. Another thing also is, there's a kinyan of Isser, meaning when you buy an Eved Kanani, his whole status of who he is changes. From being a full-fledged guy to now sort of becoming a half Yid. He's chayiv in mitzvahs. He has to have a milah, a tvila, and he's chayiv in mitzvahs like a Yid to some extent, like a woman. So that's a very powerful kinyan that a Yid has over him. But here the Gemara is saying, when a guy comes and captures this Eved Kanani, he does not own him to this extent, but he does own this Eved Kanani for his work, for the work that he does. And Rashi here brings, we already find in the Torah, the Gemara is soon going to point this out, we already find in the Torah that a guy could acquire a Yid to be a slave of his. The Torah in Parshas Bahar talks about the fact that a guy buys a Yiddish slave. So just like a guy could acquire a Yid to be a slave, so too, if he buys an Eved Kanani, he will have to work for this guy. So the captors that captured him, they own him for his Maisi Yadayim, at least, even though they don't own Mamish's body 100% like a Yid owns Eved Kanani, but they own him for his work. And that's a Yid that buys now from this Eved Kanani will buy the Maisi Yadayim. He's buying that rights for his work. And then if we'll have him do a Mila and Tvila, if he didn't do before, or even if he did before, but now when the Yid buys him from the guy, he's going to be owned by the Yid like a regular Eved Kanani. So here the Gemara brings the source, and this is the next piece of here in the Gemara to explain what's the source of this, that when a guy captures an Eved Kanani, the guy actually acquires. There's a kinyan that the guy has on this Eved Kanani. So Reish Lakish said, how do I know that a guy can acquire another guy And the kinyan takes effect that you can own another person that can be a slave, that you own him for his work that he does. Shenema, the pasuk says, "V'gam ibnei tishavim agarim yimochem." So the bnei tishavim that live amongst you in Eretz Yisrael, mehem tiknu. From them you can acquire an eved. So this pasuk here, when it says mehem tiknu, these two words are extra. Rashi brings that it already said before that in the pasuk the same words mehem tiknu eved v'amma, and the pasuk here repeats a second time mehem tiknu. Why is it saying it a second time? So it's teaching you as follows: Atem kainim mehem. You can acquire an eved kanani from the goyim, but v'loheim kainim mikem. But they, the goyim, cannot acquire one of the yidden, to be an eved in the same way. And that means that a goy cannot own a yid to the same extent, to own his body fully the way a yid owns an eved kanani. He could own a yid to work for him, but not to own him fully, to own his body. And then the Braisa continues, "V'loheim kainim zemizeh," that a guy cannot acquire another guy to be his eved, that he owns an eved through this kinyan. But now the Braisa, or here the Shlakish continues and says right away that Yochol lo yiknu zeh. I would think that one guy cannot acquire another guy to be a slave. So the Gemara interjects and asks on this. A second ago, we just said over here that goyim could not acquire one each other to be a slave. And right afterwards it says, you would think that they cannot acquire itself. So the Gemara asks, what's going on over here? Yochel lo yiknu zeh. You're asking, I would think that they can't acquire one another? But ha'amrit, you just said, lohem kainim zamizeh, that goyim cannot acquire one another to be a slave. So what's the story? Could a guy acquire another guy to be a slave or not? So the Gemara explains it depends to what extent. Hachi ka'amar, this is what it means here. V'lohem kainim zamizeh l'gufay. One guy cannot acquire another guy to be his slave, to own his body. As I mentioned before, the full extent of ownership, like he owned an ox or a donkey. But that's the first point the Braisa says. But then it says, I would think that one guy cannot own another guy as a slave to work for him. For his work, that is the work that he does with his hands should belong to his master, even if you don't own him mamish, own his body fully. So on this, Amrit Kavachaimer. There's a Kavachaimer that a guy could own another guy as a slave of his for his work that he does. What's the Kavachaimer? Because Yisrael kaina. A guy could even acquire a yid for his work that he does with his hands to be his. So for sure, I would say that one guy could acquire another guy to be his, to work for him. So therefore, from here, the Gemara is saying, what Shlakish said here, I see that a guy could acquire a yid to be his. If so, over here, when it comes to this Eved Kanani, which is sort of a partial yid, these captors that captured him, they acquire him. They're kind of him through the fact that they captured him. But the Gemara asks on that, but the question still is, I should say, Hani Mili Bekaspa, maybe the power that a guy has to acquire another guy, or to acquire a yid, that's only if he pays money with this. But with chazake, who says that a guy could acquire a yid or Eved Kanani to be his? What are we talking about over here? We're talking about these people that captured this Eved Kanani. They didn't pay for him. Rashi here brings the kinyan of a guy is with money. When it comes to yidden, to acquire a property, for example, you have a few options. It's not only with chazaki. You could acquire, not only with money, that is. You could acquire with kesef, or with shtar, or with chazakah. There's different ways. But by a guy, when he buys a piece of property, so the kinyan of a guy is only with kesef, with money. So when you acquire an eved, a guy acquires a yid for an eved, it also has to be only with money. And Rashi brings a pasuk, it says mikesef miknasai, but not with chazakah. What's chazakah regarding an eved? How do you make chazakah over an eved? By a property, the way you make the kinyan of chazakah on a property is by improving something in the property, working in it, and expressing your ownership in it. By an eved, what's chazakah with an eved? By the fact that you're taking him in and you're using him as an eved. He's serving you, he's dressing you, or he's carrying your clothing for you. He's serving you as an eved. That's the kinyan of chazakah for an eved. But the Gemara's question is, who says that a guy can be kaina an eved with the kinyan of chazakah if he does not pay for him? So the question over here is regarding these captors that captured this Eved Kanani, can they acquire just by capturing him? Maybe they have to pay for him. So the Gemara brings, they could. Amar Rav Papa, so Rav Papa said, we find by Goyim that the kinyan of chazakeh for territory or for property works. Where do we see this? So Rav Papa says, Ammon u'Moav tieru b'sichain. Ammon and Moav, the area, the lands that belong to Ammon and Moav were purified through sichain. What is this talking about? Yidden are not allowed to come and instigate these two nations, Ammon and Moav. As Rashi here brings the pasuk, al totzeres Moav, al tetzureim. That's so Yidden were not allowed to conquer their territory. So what happened? What the Eibishter did is he had Sichain conquer those territories of Ammon and Moav. And now that the territories belong to Sichain, so it was sort of purified. It went out of the possession of Ammon and Moav. So now the Yidden were allowed to go and conquer those territories from Sichain. So what do we see? What happened over here? When Sichain conquered the territory from Ammon and Moav, so Ammon and Moav gave up on this land, they gave up this territory, and Sichain conquered it. And through the fact that Sichain conquered it, they got ownership over it, and then Yidden could take it from them. So we say the same thing when it comes to an Eved, that this Eved Kanani, when his master was miyayish from him, so his master gave, the Jewish master that is, gave up rights and ownership over him through his yish, and now the Shaboy, the captors captured him, and that's a chazakah when they capture him and they use him as an Eved, and they're kind him like this, similar to what we see by Ammon and Moav. But the Gemara still asks on this, Ashkechan, Oivik Kechavim, Oivik Kechavim. I only find over here that this kind of a kinyan through chazakah together with Yush takes effect if one guy would be acquiring another guy. That's what Reish Lakish spoke about, and that's also the case by Ammon and Moav and Sichain, where Ammon and Moav captured the territory from Sichain. Or again, the other way around, Sichain captured the territory from Ammon and Moav. But Oivik Kechavim Yisrael Minolan. How do I know that if a guy would simply go and capture a Yid, that he can acquire that way without money? And over here, this Evet Kanani is to some extent considered already to be a Yid. He's obligated in some mitzvahs like a Yid. So again, the question still remains, how do we know that when he got captured by these Goyim, that they have a power to own him, to acquire him? Answers the Gemara, the Chsiv, because there's a pasuk, it says, Vayish mimenu shevi. That when Yidden went out to war, and it describes there that the Yidden captured from the Goyim a Shevi. Who did they acquire from the Goyim? They acquired from the Goyim a Shifcha Kananes that was captured by the Goyim. This was a Shifcha Kananes that was owned by Yidden, and it was captured by the Goyim, and then the Yidden captured her back. So over here you see that the pasuk refers to her as a Shevi, that she was really captured. Why was she captured? Because when the Goyim captured this Shifcha Kananes, it takes effect. There's a certain ownership that they could attain over her. And therefore this is the answer over here to the question that according to Rava, when a Yid redeems an Eved Kanani from a Goy, he now becomes an Eved for this new master that just redeemed him, if he redeemed him with the intention to work with him, because the ones that capture him, the Goyim that capture him, own him. So now you're getting that ownership from the Goyim that owned him. Amar Rav Shema bar Abba, Amar Rav Yechanan, regarding this halacha of an Eved Kanani that got captured. So Rav Shema bar Abba said in the name of Rav Yechanan, Eved shebarach mi beis asurim. An Eved Kanani that was captured and he was placed in prison and he ran away. Yotza lecheres. As soon as he runs away from his captors, so then he goes free. Not only does he go free, we force his master, the kaisav loy get shichra, and the master has to write him a document to free him. So this is the halacha, as I mentioned before, regarding Eved Kanani. It's not enough the fact that he ran out of prison and now he's not owned monetarily by his master, because the master has a kinyan of Isser over him. He will not be allowed to become a full Yid to marry into Klal Yisrael. When an Eved Kanani gets fully freed, he becomes a Ben Chayrin, a full Yid that he could marry into Klal Yisrael. If you want him to have the ability to marry a Bas Chayrin, he's going to have to get a get shichra. He's going to have to get a document of freedom from his master. Tanan. So the Gemara asks on this statement of Rabbi Yechanan, from what it says in our Mishnah. What did it say in our Mishnah? The second opinion. Till now we were discussing the Tanakama, but the second opinion of our Mishnah was Rav Shimon ben Gamliel Leimer. Rav Shimon ben Gamliel says regarding this Eved Kanani that got captured, Benkach or Benkach, no matter how he was freed. If someone comes and frees him, whether with the intention to keep him as a slave or with the intention to free him, doesn't make a difference. Yishtabed. Either way, he's going to have to continue working as a slave. That's Rav Shimon Gamliel's opinion. Now, the question on Rabbi Yechanan is, V'Ama Rabba Bar Bachana, Omer Rabbi Yechanan. Rabba Bar Bachana said in the name of Rabbi Yechanan himself, Kol Mokim Shoshana Rav Shimon Gamliel b'Mishnaseinu. Anytime Rav Shimon Gamliel says a halacha in the Mishnah, halacha k'maisai, we always pass like Rav Shimon Gamliel. Chutz mi'arev v'tzidon v'raya achreina. Besides 3 halachas that we do not pass like Rav Shimon Gamliel. Otherwise, the halacha is always like Rav Shimon Gamliel. So if so, the question is, it seems like a contradiction here in what Rabbi Yochanan holds. On one hand, Rabbi Yochanan is saying that an Eved that runs away from prison, he goes free. On the other hand, Rabbi Yochanan says that we have to paskin like Rabbi Shimon Gamliel in our Mishnah that says that any Eved that got captured and then he gets freed under whatever circumstances, benkach or benkach, whatever circumstances he got freed, he has to go back to work as an Eved. So now the Gemara explains that this question will depend on the 2 pshatim we had before that the Gemara said on Daf Lamed Zayin Amud Beis in the Mishnah. What is the Mishnah speaking about? The first master that owned this Eved. Was he meyayish? Did he give up his rights of ownership on this Eved or not? Says the Gemara, Bishloi Mala Abaye. According to the Abaye that explained before the Mishnah, that the Mishnah is speaking about that the first master did not give up his rights over the master, or over the Eved that is. So Maikila Lahai Lefnei Yish. So what Rav Shimon Gamliel says in our Mishnah, that the Eved is going to have to still work as an Eved even after he gets freed, that's because the first master never gave up on him. So he's going to have to go back work for the first master. And v'hai lachiyish, and here Rabbi Yochanan that says that an Eved that runs away from prison gets freed, that's because it was after Yish. Here speaking about that the master gave up on him. But Rava says that our Mishnah is speaking about that the first master did give up on him. And still, Rav Shimon Gamliel says that the Eved, when he's freed, has to continue working. He works for the one that frees him. He works for this second master, the Yid that just freed him now. So Kashi, the Rabbi Yochanan, Rabbi Yochanan. So there's a contradiction here in the opinion of Rabbi Yochanan. Here Rabbi Yochanan says when he runs away, he's free. And in our Mishnah, Rav Shimon Gamliel says that he's not free, that he has to go work now for the person that freed him. Amalach Rave, so Rave will answer you, there's no contradiction here. Time emai mishum dechiskiyah. This that Rav Shimon Gamliel says in our Mishnah, that whenever an Eved is freed, he's going to have to go and work for his original master, or he's going to have to work for the master that freed him, even though the first master gave up on him. But nevertheless, he's going to have to go back and work for him, or he has to go back actually work for the first master, that is. So the reason was because of what Chizkiah said. What was the reason of Chizkiah? Chizkiah said, we don't want an Eved to use this as a way to free himself. He's going to go and get himself captured, and then he's going to free himself in this way. Someone's going to release him, and now he's going to be free from his master because his master gave up on him. So therefore, Rabbi Shimon Gamliel said that there's a takana that he must go back to work for his first master. That was the reason in our Mishnah. But by Reyach Shani, when you have a slave that was imprisoned and he ran away from prison, this is a different story. Because over here, he got captured in such a dangerous situation. So hashta l'ktala masa nafshe. Over here, this person is running away from prison and he's endangering his life. If they catch him running away from prison, they can kill him. Apuli apol nafshe legayasais. Should you be concerned that this person in such a kind of situation where he puts his life in danger, that he would run away from his master and allow himself to be captured by this army, by these people that are placing him in prison? So in our Mishnah, Rav Shimon Gamliel was speaking about a situation where we're afraid that a person might get himself captured to get himself free, but that's not in a situation where his life would be in danger. If it's a situation where his life is in danger, for sure, Rav Shimon Gamliel would agree that over here he goes free, because there's no concern that a person would get himself captured in such a way. Okay, the Gemara here brings 2 different incidents that happened with slaves or with maids that got captured. Amsei the Mar Shmuel, the maid of Shmuel, again a Shifcha Kananis that belonged to Shmuel. So Ishtaboy, she got captured. Parkua Lushum Amasa. So there were Yidden that came and redeemed her, but they redeemed her with the intention that she should still be a maidservant. V'shadrua lei, and then they sent to Shmuel, and they sent the maidservant to Shmuel, and shalchu lei, and they sent to tell Shmuel as follows: Anan Rav Shimon Gamliel svirulon. We redeemed her with the intention that she should be captured. That she should still serve as a slave. Now our opinion is like Rav Shimon Gamliel in the Mishnah. And Rav Shimon Gamliel says that no matter what, she has to go back work for her first master. But you, inami k'rabbanan svirulach, even if you hold like the opinion of the Rabbanon that it depends if she was redeemed with the intention to still work as a slave or with the intention to free her. But Anan L'shom Amasar Pakinala. We want you to know that we redeemed her with the intention that she should still serve as a maid, and therefore you can keep her as a maid. But the Gemara says still that she really was not supposed to serve as a maid, and really she was free. Why? Because the Inu Savar, the ones that freed her, they thought Lefnei Yishava, that Shmuel did not give up on her yet. So therefore they thought that she has to go back work for her master. But V'loihi, that wasn't the case. La'achar Yishava, it was after Yush. Shmuel already gave up on her, and therefore once she was redeemed after Yush, she does not have to go back to work for her for Shmuel, and she doesn't have to work for the ones that redeemed her either. Shmuel loy. Now the Gemara says, so what did Shmuel do with her? Shmuel loy mi boy d'shtabudi loy mishtabed ba. Not only did he not take her back, that is to work for her, for him that is, el Gittin de cherusa nami loy atzracha. Shmuel said, not like the opinion of Rabbi Yochanan before. Shmuel says the master does not even have to give her a get to free her at all. Why not? Shmuel l'taimei. Shmuel follows his opinion that he said elsewhere. The Hama Shmuel says hamafkir avdei. A person that frees a slave. He just declares his slave to be ownerless. Yatzel l'cheidos, that alone is enough that he's completely free. He's completely free, meaning he can even go and marry a Bas Yisrael. He's not monetarily and not the Isra, he's totally free. He doesn't need to have any additional document to free him. Shenem, as the Pasuk says, V'chol eved ish miknas kosev. An eved of a man that was acquired for money. So this word ish is extra. Why does it have to say an eved of a man? Eved ish v'loy eved isha. Is he an eved of a man and not an eved of a woman? What does this mean, eved ish? Ela eved sheyesh loy rishus l'rabbi olav. An eved that has a ish, that has a power monetarily over him, kari eved. He is still an eved. She'en loy rishus l'rabbi olav. But if his master has no rights over him monetarily because he declared him to be ownerless, hefker, and kari eved. He's not an eved at all. He's totally free. Not that you lose the monetary ownership, but the moment you don't have the monetary ownership, you're completely free, and you can go and marry a bas chayrin. He's a regular yid. Another incident that happened, Amsei de Rab Abba Bazutri, the maid of Rab Abba Bazutri, Ishtaboy, she also got captured. Parka hahu tarmuda l'shum itza. So here a guy actually came and saw her, and this tarmuda came and redeemed her for himself. He wanted to marry her as a wife. So people, or the Bezdin, went and sent a message to Rab Abba Bar Zutra, telling him that iyos of this, if you want to do the right thing, shadala gita de cherusa. Send her a document to free her. Send her a get shecher to free her, because this guy had freed her for himself. Which is an interesting thing. Rabbi Kiva over here asks a question on this. She's basically still captured. She was captured by Goyim first, and now this other guy came and redeemed her. How could the master go and free her, send her a get shikhr if she's captured and owned by this guy? But so over here in the Gemara, it seems like you see that even while she's still captured by a guy, sending her a get shikhr will have some effect. Okay, but the Gemara asks over here, what's the point of the master of Rab Abba Bar Zutra sending her some kind of a freedom? Hey Chidami, what are we speaking about over here? If it's possible to free her from this guy, if Yidden can go and free her, so lamali get to the cherusa. Why is it necessary for him to send a get to completely free her? Second even guy? If again, second guy, no. Yeah, second guy now captured her. Now basically freed her and has her. Yeah, to free her from the second guy. If we could free her from this second guy, so why did they tell Rab Abba that he has to free her? Let other Yidden come and free her with the intention that she should remain a maidservant and she should go serve Rab Abba. He doesn't have to free her. Now, if this guy is not going to be ready to allow her to be freed at all, he wants to marry her, right? He redeemed her for himself to marry her. So kishadala get to the cherusa my have. What is he going to accomplish? What would Rab Abba accomplish by sending her a document to free her? This guy is anyways not going to allow. He wants to marry her. So the Gemara gives two pshatim to explain what the story here was. La'ilam, one pshat is the matzu parkala. There were other Yidden that could have freed her with the intention that she should go back to work for her master, for Rab Abba. But in the kivin, the mishadala gita de cherusa. But the point here is, once Rab Abba will go and send her a document that he's freeing her, chaburi mechabri ahadadi parkila. So then Yidden will come and free her. As long as Rab Abba wants to still enslave her, so other Yidden are not going to come and redeem her, because they're going to say, well, she's anyways not the full Yid. But if Rab Abba is going to come and send her a get shichrur, then other Yidden will come and free her. This is based on the Tanakhama's opinion in the Mishnah, that Yidden will only free an Evet Kanani or a Shifcha Kananis if they know that she'll be free like a Yid. Another pshat over here is really, this guy that freed her with the intention to marry her, Yidden cannot free her. He wants to marry her. But, so what's the accomplishment of Rab Abba that he'll send her a document of freedom? Once Rab Abba will send her a document to free her, she will become very cheap in the eyes of this guy, and he's going to free her. And the reason for this is because when Rab Abba sends this document showing that this was my maidservant, it basically proves that she was owned by a Yid, and she's somewhat of a Yid. And therefore for the guy, it'll be embarrassing that he's marrying this wife, that now everyone will find out that she was a Yid, or she was owned by a Yid. So therefore he'll be ready to free her. In the Gemara, is this true that Goyim are embarrassed to marry a maidservant that was owned by a Yid? But the master has said regarding the attitude of Goyim, for Goyim, it's more cherished, a behem of a Yid, to have a relation with a behemoth that was owned by a Yid, even more than their own wives that they have. So Adarab, something that's owned by a Yid is more valuable for them. So the Gemara answers, privately to themselves, that's the truth. That's what they desire more. But if it's publicly and openly and everybody knows that she was owned by a Yid, zilu milsa, they're embarrassed about this, and therefore this will cause this maidservant to be freed. Another story the Gemara says, there was this maidservant, a Shifcha Kananis, that was living in Pumbedisa, that there were Yidden that were playing around with her inappropriately. They were doing Yisurim with her because she was not yet a full Yid and she couldn't marry a full Yid properly. So they were misbehaving with her. So Abaye said as follows: Yilav, the Omer of Yudah Shmuel. If not for the fact that Rav Yudah said in the name of Shmuel that Kol HaMeshachrer Avdai, anyone that frees his slave, an Evet Kanani, Oiver Be'esa, you over on a Esa, as the Gemara will bring soon. The Esa says Lo Oilam Behem Taveidu, that you own an Evet Kanani, you must keep him forever. If not for this, I would force the master that he should free this maidservant, because people are playing around with her. Let her be freed so she could marry a regular Yid properly. So Abaye says, but we can't do this. Why not? Because there's you're not allowed to free an Evet. But Ravina said about this story, Kiha, in such a case, Rav Yudah will agree that it's the right thing for the master to force the master to free her. Because there's a Issa happening over here, because people are taking advantage of her. So the Gemara asks, and Abaye disagrees with this. Does Abaye say that this Essa, that you must hold her on to her forever, you're not allowed to free her? But in a case where there's an Issa, where people are playing around with her, Abaye would not agree that you have to free her. But there was a story with a woman. She was half a maidservant and half free. So for example, she was owned by partners. One partner freed her and one did not. So she was sort of half Yid and half Bas Chayrin. So now this is a woman that's in a situation where she can't marry anybody. She cannot marry a Evet Kanani because she's half free. She can't marry a Yid because she's half a Shivcha. So what happened? People were taking advantage of her. They knew that she can't marry anyone. So he forced the master to free her fully, that she can properly get married. Rav Nachman Yitzchak explained that case there. Minig hefker nogaba. People were just acting with her in a hefker manner because they knew she can't get married to anybody. So I see that in a case where people are misbehaving with this shivcha, with half shivcha and half bas chayden, so we forced the master to free him. So wouldn't Abaye agree regarding a full shivcha kananis as well, if people are misbehaving with her, that she should be freed? So the Gemara answers, it's not the same thing. How could you compare the two? This half shivcha and half free, she can't marry anybody. So therefore we force the the master that is to free her. Over here, by a full shivcha kananis, which these Yidden were playing around with her, marry her off to a Evet Kanani. She could marry Evet Kanani, and then he will keep her. He'll take care of her, and nobody will take advantage of her anymore. So the Gemara here brings back this halacha. Gufa, this halacha, Omer Rav Yudah Mashmuel, call him Meshacher Avdai, anybody that frees his slave, Oive Be'asa. He's over on a mitzvah say. What mitzvah say is that? Shenema, the pasuk says, La'olam behem tavedu. You own a slave, a eved kanani or a shivcha kananis, they have to work for you forever. So Meisvei, the Gemara asks on this, Ma'isa b'Rabbi Eliezer. There was a story with Rabbi Eliezer, shenichnas bebeis haknesses. They came into the shul one day, v'le matzah asara, and they didn't have a minyan for davening. So what did they do to have a tenth? V'shichrir avdoi. So just in order to have a tenth, he had an eved kanani that he owned, so he freed him. And now he became a full yid, and they had a minyan. So here we see that they were over on this asset to free the eved kanani. How were they allowed to free him? Answers the Gemara, mitzvah shani. For the purpose of a mitzvah, it's different, it's allowed. Or there's another gerser that you add, mitzvah derabim shani. This is not just a plain mitzvah, but this is a mitzvah to have a minyan. So for this, you're allowed to free eved kanani to get a tenth for a minyan. Tana Rabbanan, I hear the Gemara actually brings it, there's a machlekes about this. So we learned in the Braise, Lo'olam bem taved, when the pasuk says that you have to have the slave work for you forever, sorry, Rishus, it's voluntary. You don't have to, but you're allowed. Divrei Rabbi Shmuel. This is Rabbi Shmuel's opinion. Rabbi Kiva says, Chayva. No, you must. You must have him work for you forever. We had this in the Gemara in Saita. The Gemara there explains that according to Rabbi Shmuel, the reason why it's only Yereshos, sorry, is because Bechlal it says regarding all the Canaanim that live in Eretz Yisrael that you're supposed to kill them all out. You're not allowed to have them work for you. So here this pasuk is saying a chiddush that if this Eved is born from a mother that's a Canaanis and not from a father that's a Canaani, then you're allowed to have him work for you forever. So it's only the pasuk is saying a heter that you're allowed. But Rabbi Kiva says no, it's a chayva, you must. So the Gemara asks, if so, v'dilme, Rabbi Eliezer, savala command amar rishos, maybe going back to the story before, Rabbi Eliezer that freed a slave to have him for a minyan, how do you know the reason is? Because by a mitzvah is different, you can be over on this mitzvah say for the purpose of the mitzvah of minyan, but maybe the reason is because he holds like Rabbi Shmuel, there's no mitzvah at all. Says the Gemara, that can't be. The Tanya Behedya, we learned clearly in a Braisa, Rabbi Eliezer says, like Rabbi Kiva, that this is a mitzvah. It's a chayva that you must have and work for you forever. In connection to this, the Gemara brings an interesting thing. Omar Rabba says, Bahani tlas mili, because of these three things, Nochsi balibatim minichseyan. Balibatim, homeowners, people that are wealthy, they lose their money. What are these three things? The mafki of dayu l'cherusa. They're over here on this isser of freeing their slaves. That is a mitzvah say you're not allowed. Or the sairi nichsayu b'shabbata. And on Shabbos they walk around in their properties and they look to see what's going on. What do they need to have done? Even though it's Shabbos and they're only going to do the work after Shabbos. But the very fact that they would walk around and their mind is occupied with looking in their properties and their work on Shabbos. That's another reason. V'dekavi su'udasayu b'shabbata. And on Shabbos, they would make their Shabbos meal on Shabbos afternoon in the time when there was a drasha and the bismedrash. You have this so many times in the Gemara. In the times of the Gemara, there would be a drasha on Shabbos that everybody would come to and hear divrei Torah from the Rav that would speak. And these people, they would make their drasha, they would make their Shabbos so that during that time, and they should have made it either earlier or after, not during the time of the drasha. The Amar Rab Chiya ba'Abba Amar Rab Yechanan, shtei mishpachos. So in connection to this last point there, he said that there were two families that lived in Yerushalayim. There was one family that made their Suda on Shabbos. And the other one made their Suda on Erev Shabbos, and both of these families were uprooted. So the one that made the Suda on Shabbos is like we just mentioned, they made their Shabbos meal at the time of the drasha on Shabbos. And the one that made the Suda on Erev Shabbos, Rashi here actually has two pshatim. One pshat Rashi has is that the main Suda you should be more Shabbos day than Friday night. There's a bigger mitzvah to have more food for the Suda Shabbos day than Friday night. But they did the opposite. They made the main Suda Friday night, and Shabbos day they didn't have such a big Suda. Another pshat Rashi says, Erev Shabbos means literally Friday afternoon. Friday afternoon, you're not allowed to make a big Suda. You're supposed to keep your stomach empty in order to have the main Suda for the covet of Shabbos. Friday night. Not Friday afternoon to make a big barbecue and to serve a lot of food, especially in the summer Shabbos when Shabbos comes in very late. So Friday afternoon, a person has a whole big Suda. So because of such a thing, these families were uprooted. Going back to the story, to the halacha of freeing a slave. So Amar Rabbi said, Amar Rav, in the name of Rav, Hamaktish Avdai. One that declares his Evet to become hektish. It should belong to hektish. What does this mean? What is the person really saying? Could he be makdish his eved? Could the hektish own his eved? He says no, they can't. Yotze lecheres, he goes free. Why? My time. What's the reason for this? Gufei loy kaddish. His body itself cannot become hektish. Obviously, his body cannot become hektish as a carbon. Right? And not only that, you can be makdish different things that's owned by bedek habayis, which is used for things that are needed to fix in the Beis Hamikdash. But an eved, the body of an eved, cannot be used for that either. So the intention of the master, when he declared his eved to be hektish, is not for either of those, not for a carbon and not for bedek habayis. And also, so you may say, well, he probably meant only to be makdish, that he's going to give the value of his evet to hektish. But he didn't say that, the Gemara says. L'domi loy ka'amar. He didn't say that I'm giving the value of my evet to hektish. So what did he mean to say when he's makdish his evet? You know what he meant to say? The lehevi am kodesh ka'amar. What he basically meant to say is that my evet should become part of the holy nation. So he's basically freeing him, and when you free your evet, he becomes a yid. That's what he meant to say. So according to Rashi, the pshat in the Gemara over here is we're trying to understand the intention of the master, and this is the way we understand what he intended to do, to free him to become part of the holy nation. Rav Yosef Amarav, Rav Yosef said in the name of Rav, a similar halacha but different. Hamafkir avdai. If a person is mafkir his eved, he declares him ownerless, that is yotze lecheres. So with that, he goes free, he's completely free. So now the Gemara explains, man dama makdish, the one that says that you're makdish him, that you declare him to be hektish, kol shekei mafkir. Definitely if you mafkir him is more clear that you want him to be free. So for sure, if you mafkir him, he becomes a yid. Man dama mafkir, but the second opinion of Yosef that says if you mafkir your eved, that he becomes free, avol makdish like. But if you declare him as hektish, he won't be free. Why? Because Rav Yosef argues. He says, Dilme lidmei kama. Even though you didn't spell that out, but maybe you did mean to say that the value of this eved I'm going to give to hektish. So therefore, the eved himself will not be free at all. But the shaila over here was asked about both of these cases, and this is going back to something that the Gemara spoke about before. Rabbi Yechanan and Shmuel spoke about this. Tzarech get shichrur, oy loy tzarech. When you free your eved, you declare him ownerless, or you makdish him, which also, according to one opinion, means that he's free. Do you additionally have to give him a get shichrur to free him, or not? So again, as I mentioned before, when you own an eved, besides the monetary ownership, there's also a certain status of Isser that he has, that he's not yet a full Yid. So now after you free him, do you additionally have to give him a get shikhr that he should be totally free? So Tashma, Dom Rab Chia Barav and Amarav, Rab Chia Barav said in the name of Rav, Echad Zeh ve'echad Zeh. In either of these cases, when you freed him, Yotza L'cheres, he goes free, but with Tzarech get shikhr. And additionally, the master does have to give him a get shikhr to be allowed to marry a bas chayre. So this is actually the opinion of Rav, which argues on what Shmuel said on Amar Aleph. Shmuel said that once you declare him ownerless, you don't have to give him any get shikhr at all. Amar Rabbe, says the Gemara, now Rabbe said, and this is going back to what Rabbe said before, when a person is makdish his eved. So what did Rabbe say? When you makdish your eved does not become hektish. All you mean to do is that he becomes part of the Am Kodesh. But there's no such a thing of an Eved becoming hektish. So here this Gemara is going to ask from a few places where we see that an Eved could become hektish. So Rabbi asked, do we have a question on our own halacha that we said from the following brayse? Hamakdish nechasav. A person that declares all of his possessions to be hektish. Amongst his possessions were also slaves, avodim kananim. So now what happens to these slaves? Do they become mamish hektish? Their body does not become hektish. But what happens is, the moment the master declared all of his properties to become hektish, so he gave up, he was miyayish already on this eved. But at the same time though, the hektish cannot own the guf of this eved. So but what happens here? Eina gizbarin rashoin lo yitzian lecheres. The gizbarin, which is the gabai of hektish, cannot have them be redeemed from hektish, which means the slave himself will not be able to redeem himself. Usually, anything that's owned by hektish, to bedek habayis, what's the halacha? You could redeem it from hektish. So if this slave, his body, if his very body was owned by hektish, so then he could redeem himself, like anything else that's owned by hektish. But the thing is, his body, though, is not owned by hektish. Hektish cannot own the body of a slave. So therefore, he cannot redeem himself the way any other item of hektish is redeemed. Aval, however, he is owned for his money, for his value. So therefore, Hektish could sell this Evet to someone else, not as a redemption. Hektish could make money, so they can decide that they want to sell him to someone. And then others can have this Evet buy himself off of them. Right? So this is an Evet has a koyach to buy himself. Okay, that's the distinction here that the Tanakhama is making. He cannot be freed from Hektish, but he could buy himself. Right? Again, in order to be freed from Hektish, that's only if Hektish owns your body. You can free yourself from Hektish. But Hektish does not own his body; they only own his value. So therefore, the Hektish could sell him. They could sell him for his value, and then he'll be able to free himself from that person that bought this Evet from Hektish. So you see here clearly, what does this Brisa say? This Brisa is saying that Hektish could own the value of an Evet, not like what Rabbi said before. The Brisa brings there another opinion. Rabbi says, I say, this Evet could also pay his own value and he could free himself this way. So as Rashi brings, how does an Evet get any money? Any money that he owns does not belong to him. If someone gives him money with the condition that no one else should have rights to this money, but he has his own money now, so he could free himself. Because even though the Hektish cannot have him redeem himself, because his body is not owned by the Hektish, but he could buy himself. Just like someone else could buy, the Hektish could sell him to someone else, he could also buy himself. But the point here is, we see clearly that there is a concept of ownership over an Evet by Hektish, not like what Rabbi said, that there's no such a thing. So the Gemara answers, Masnisin, Karamis, Alei de Rav, you're asking from a Braisa, or Masnita from a Braisa on Rav, Rav Tanahu Palik. Rav himself is a Tana, and he can argue on what it says in the Braisa. This is an answer the Gemara gives sometimes. Rav wasn't right in that generation. He was a student of Rabbeinu HaKadosh, and he was the first of the Amiroin. So sometimes the Gemara says, Rav is able to argue on a Braisa, so there's no question on Rav. The Gemara asks from another Braisa, Toshama, it says in another Braisa, Ach kol cherem v'goyme. It says in the pasuk kol cherem, which is an expression of hektish, when you makdish something. So in that pasuk it says, Mikol hashaloi mi odom ubehema, that you could be makdish even an odom. What does that mean? Elu avodav v'shivchaisav aknanim. A person could be makdish his eved and shivcha kananis to belong to hektish. So here's a clear brayso that's learning from a pasuk that you could be makdish an eved and a shivcha kananis. So how could Rabbi, in the name of Rav, say that you can't? And it says the Gemara, Hocha b'mayaskinon, the Omar lidmei. Over here, the master clearly spelled out that I'm only giving the value of my Evet to belong to Hektish, but not the Evet itself. Rabbi before was talking about a person that wanted to be Makdish, the Evet itself. He didn't mention anything about money, and that you can't do. So the Gemara, so this is a simple answer. So the Gemara asks, if you're giving this answer for this Braisa here, Idoch Nami, the previous Braisa that we asked the question from, Nami Damalad. Why didn't you say that Braisa is also over there when it said that Hektish could own a slave? Why didn't you want to say that Braisa is also talking only about a case where the person said that he's only giving the value of the slave to Hektish? Why did we have to say that Rav is arguing with that Braisa? And says the Gemara, that can't be the pshat in that Braisa, because Ihachi Eina Gizbarin Rashayin Loitzion L'Chayres. The Braisa there says, the Tanakama there says, that the Gabai is not allowed to have him be redeemed. Gizbarin Ma'avidetayu. Why is the Braisa saying that? That they're not allowed to have him be redeemed. If it's just the value of him, so then the slave is not at all owned by the Hektish. The slave is still owned by his master. It's just money that the master said he's going to give to Hektish. So why is it at all mentioning that the Gizbarin cannot have him be freed? Visu, and furthermore, the Braisa says, Avo moichin oisan la'cherim. Hektish could sell this Evet to someone else. They can sell because Hektish does own the value of this Evet, so they do have a certain ownership of him, even if not a full ownership on his body, but they have an ownership over his value, so they can sell him to someone else. And then it said, others could free him. How could anybody buy this Evet from the Hektish if the master is only giving the money of this Evet to the Hektish? And Vesu, Rabbi, what did Rabbi say? That the Evet himself could free himself, he could buy himself from the Hektish. If the master was only giving his money to the Hektish, so what does it mean that Hektish is selling him? So therefore, from all of this, we see that the previous Braisa does argue on Rav, and Hektish could own the value of an Evet, even if they can't own the goof of an Evet, but they could own the Evet for his value. Unlike Rav that said that Hektish cannot have any ownership over Evet at all. There's another point there in Rashi where Rashi says that what happens if the master clearly says that I'm only making my Evet Hektish for his value. So why would that not take effect? So Rashi says it still does not take effect. The lashon of kedusha that the master says goes on his body, and it goes, and the fact that he becomes part of the Am Kedosha, part of Yidden, but he's not owned by Hektish. That's what Rav's opinion is. Okay, there's more in Rashi over here about this. Okay.